Welcome to Bring the World Home, a production of the Returned Peace Corps Volunteers of Hawaii. My name is Linda Chock, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Northern Mariana Islands of Micronesia from 1966 to 1968. With us today is Greg Knudsen. Welcome, Greg. And he was assigned to the Chuuk Islands during 1974 to 1976. Can you show us on the map where you were assigned?
Well, Chuuk is one of the Federated States of Micronesia, way out in the middle of the Central Pacific, 500 miles to the southeast of Guam.
And can you tell us a little bit about what the islands were like?
It was very simple, agrarian, subsistence kind of economy. It was, when we were there, part of the trust territory of the Pacific Islands. So it was a protectorate of the United States, but it wasn't really colonized so much by the U.S., although there was some U.S. presence that was evident there. For example, like there was a U.S. post office. Oh, okay. You could write from Bangor, Maine, all the way to Chuuk with the same postage that you could anywhere else in the country.
I see. Wow.
So that was kind of handy. But on the other hand, where we served was on an island that was several miles outside of that district center. So we didn't really have much communication or accessibility. So we felt we were pretty isolated. Pretty
remote.
Yeah.
You mentioned we.
Yes, I was there with my wife, and
okay.
as we were talking before, this was something that was pretty unique. The Peace Corps had had a problem with attrition in Micronesia. A lot of couples, or a lot of individuals were leaving, so they decided an experiment to have one group with all couples. So they recruited 20 couples, or 40 of us, and sent us out to Chuuk. At the time, we called it Truk. It was known as Truk until I think around 1990.
Okay.
But anyway,
that's very unusual to have all married couples within a group.
It was an experiment. It was the only time that I know of. I don't know if they've ever tried it anywhere else. It didn't necessarily improve the attrition situation because at the end of the 2 years, there were only 16 of us, or 8 couples.
I see.
So again, many folks did leave early, didn't feel like they could complete the 2 years of volunteer service. But being that I was a couple, yes, my wife was with me the whole time. And this is something that we had been talking about after we had first met in college. We went to the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and we were both studying in the communication field. And one of the main interests that we shared was a desire to go into the Peace Corps. So that probably more than anything else did lead us to get married immediately out of college, to send in an application, and to head off to the Peace Corps. It wasn't a major decision. It was almost just a given that that was what we knew we wanted to do. So,
did you know whereabouts in the world you wanted to be able to serve?
No, we really didn't. And we were so open-minded about that when they offered Micronesia, we thought, good. We had no idea where it was. We definitely would not have gone there on our own choice. Just, you know, if we were to choose anywhere to travel to, we probably never would have picked Micronesia, so all the better. We thought Peace Corps would give us the experience to try something new.
Right. What kind of training did the Peace Corps provide you to get you ready for the service?
Well, we had a pre-meeting on the mainland in Denver where they did some psychological kind of, well, some sort of mumbo-jumbo that we all had good laughs about. But nonetheless, they were trying to assess whether or not we would succeed as volunteers. That was a pre-invitation staging is what I think they called it. And then following that, that happened to be in Denver where we were living at the time.
I see.
So we didn't get to travel very far. We just got to go downtown while people from all around the country did come in. And that's when we first met several who did wind up in our group. And then, which was different than a lot of folks, especially people that live here in Hawaii, they recall having training over at Waipio Valley or other parts of Hawaii. Well, we were among the first to have in-country training.
Oh,
so we went to Chuuk.
How was that? Yeah, we were trained in Key West, Florida, while, as you say, another group was trained in Waipio Valley on the Big Island.
Yeah.
But that's unusual, you know.
Well, it was very good that we were immediately immersed into the culture.
Yes.
It might have been a little too abrupt for some. I mean, it was so sudden and quite a change. But we were together as a group initially, and we were staying just in kind of a dormitory setting that was attached to one of the schools there. And it turns out that that's the very school that Karen and I did teach at.
I see.
So it was something that we stayed in that island while many others went throughout the whole district. But the training consisted primarily of language training, some cultural, a little bit in terms of teaching techniques. There weren't that many real teachers in our group, yet with college degrees they felt we were able to do the kind of teaching that they had expected of us.
And you taught at what level, what grade level?
It was known as a junior high, but it actually was grades 9 and 10.
Okay.
And I taught in math and English.
Okay.
And my wife taught in science.
I see.
So I had been, for a short while, a math major in college. So I did have a certain math aptitude and a math interest.
Yes.
So I felt that I could prepare lessons and relate that to our students.
Did the education department supply you with the curriculum and materials?
No, there was nothing specific. There was a textbook available.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure, I mean, as I say, it was 10th grade, but I doubt if it was really at a 10th grade equivalent level. I used it as a guide. And most of the time I would develop my own worksheets. I would jump around from point to point to see what I felt my students needed. I had mentioned to you earlier that that structure of education system was relatively new in Chuuk at the time, 74 to 76. So many students weren't necessarily at the age level that you would expect. We had students probably ranging from age 14 to 24, all in the same class.
Very different maturity levels, too.
And there were different skill levels and ability levels, so it was somewhat difficult. But I did general algebra, trigonometry, geometry, and I feel I was successful in getting them to start conceptualizing things in mathematical terms that perhaps they hadn't done before.
Really? Were they able to pick up the concepts fairly easily? Or?
The better students, yes.
Okay.
Others, maybe not so much, but it was really just the range of how much effort they were putting into it. I had also mentioned to you one time that education was not necessarily compulsory at that age. So students were pretty much there by choice, and some didn't have that much of a commitment to it. And so they weren't really putting in the full effort. But others were really remarkable students. Really?
Wow. Well, that's great when they have an incentive to learn. You said you also taught some English?
I did, primarily just reading. And we just had some materials together. But you asked about our training and whether or not there was any kind of involvement from a kind of education office. There is none that I remember at all. Where I did serve was within the lagoon. And to go back to describe Chuuk itself, it consists of some high islands, volcanic islands, in the middle of a massive lagoon area. There's a surrounding reef, and a reef of about 820 square miles. It's one of the largest reefs in the world. And the peaks of this sinking range of mountains are right in the middle of it.
Are all the little islands that
Yeah.
you occupy.
So it has
Okay.
the effect of appearing to be, some high islands set in a very beautiful, relatively calm part of the ocean because it's protected by a surrounding reef. So it really appears to be like a lake in the middle of the ocean.
Wow.
It's just a real beautiful setting. And it's protected for the most part from the heavier storms and waves, so the ocean is relatively calm most of the time.
I see. Wow.
But within the lagoon, there's a main island which serves as the district center and now sort of the state capital in the Federated States.
I see.
And that has probably a third of the entire state population on that. We were on another island which physically was only a couple of miles away, but that's a big 2 miles because it separated
all
us
open ocean.
by,
Pretty
well,
much, or not?
and transportation was not that available.
I see.
Communication was pretty much non-existent. There was a typhoon toward the end of our service,
Oh,
and we were among the last couples accounted for because they could not get word to us either
my
way, either
goodness.
direction, and we were only just a few miles away.
so no telephone service. Radios? Like
Well,
Citizens Band radios or something like that?
that was pretty much what would have been available, but for one reason or another, it was not operating right now
Wow.
at that
That's
time
pretty
during the
serious.
typhoon.
Yeah.
So it took several days, and there were some folks worried because there were some fatalities, including some American contract workers.
I see.
But on the mainland, it concerned our family because they didn't know who
Sure.
it was, and
Right.
they hadn't heard from us.
Uh-huh.
So
So when the typhoon hit, I mean, the islands are so low. You're concerned
Well,
about the flooding? And
the high
waves?
islands were the ones where the trouble occurred because the grounds became saturated and it was actually from landslides.
Oh, wow.
And in more recent years, Chuuk has experienced some real tragedy with the same situation. Saturation level rains, many landslides, and about 40 people died just in, I think it was 2002. So it was a very sad situation. But out on the more remote islands, the outer islands, some of those would only come out of the ocean 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 feet or so at the most.
Right.
And
The atolls.
they are totally immersed.
Wow.
They submerged, I should say.
Right.
They're totally underwater at times, and there are stories of people tying themselves to coconut trees and having all the topsoil just totally washed away.
My
So
goodness.
they get devastated. But our island was high. It did have a mountain that might be, say, maybe the size of Cocoa Crater, about 1,200 feet. But it gave a core to the island, and it was something
Right.
that you could
Makes you feel
relate
so
to.
vulnerable.
Yeah,
know,
but I liked
to
it.
Mother
I would not
Nature.
have liked being on one of the low islands, the
Right.
low sandy atoll
Right.
islands. I did prefer staying in the lagoon and serving on a high island.
Right.
Yeah.
And you had white sand beaches all around
No,
it?
again, because of the reef, there weren't any beaches. It was mostly
No
mangrove.
beaches.
Because
Oh,
there's no
really?
heavy wave action that hits the main islands.
Oh,
It
wow.
is surrounded by the reef that is 40 miles in diameter, so it's quite a ways out.
Wow. That's right. No opportunity to create that
Yeah.
erosion.
There
of
were
the
just a
sand.
couple of stretches here and there of sand, but for the most part, no beaches at all. Now, historically, Chuuk is known for going through a number of different hands over its history, from the Spanish to the Germans,
Yes.
and
The
then it was
Japanese.
part of the Japanese between World War I and into World War II, and it was the site of a major installation by the Japanese Navy. It was known as the Gibraltar of the Pacific, or the Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Pearl Harbor. And in fact, the Americans did stage a massive bombing raid on Chuuk in 1944, which had a lot of effect on turning the direction of the war around, because they did sink 60 ships in the lagoon,
In the lagoon. Wow.
and more than 240 airplanes were destroyed as well.
Wow.
Because in Chuuk, you wouldn't know it if you went there now, but it was pretty built up. It was the main administrative center for Japan's holdings in the Pacific, in Micronesia. And they had seaplane ramps. They had, well, it was their forward base for all their naval forces.
And their infrastructure.
Yeah.
The schools,
and none of that is. There are some. There's one main structure that remains, maybe two, but the more dominant one is an old hospital, and that was just a few minutes from where we stayed.
Oh, I see.
And it's still there because it concrete walls, maybe 2 feet thick.
Serving as a hospital?
No, people are just living there now.
I see. Okay.
But it's still very evident. It's still in existence, hasn't worn down any. And there's another area that had served as like the governor's residence for the Japanese administration that has served as well in American times as a school and as now government offices for the island that we were on, which was Duplan or Toroas.
I see. Where I served in the Marianas, we noticed the generation difference. People who grew up during the Japanese time knew how to speak Japanese. Did you find that where you were too?
Yes.
Some of the people?
In fact, our host family had a mix of Japanese blood as well.
Yeah. Oh.
And there were a number of words when we were learning the language that were derived from Japanese.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be exact. If I used those words in Japan, I'm sure they wouldn't quite know. But there were some that were similar, like tenki, chitosa, okashi. I believe those are all words for that were derived from Japanese. And so the language is growing now, has probably a lot of derivations from American words as well.
I would imagine, So I was wondering, what did you see of the culture there? Like, what sorts of foods did you have? Did you cook your own food, or did you have a host family that provided you?
The arrangement we had was not to really live with the family, but all the couples were assigned to families that had additional space. Some did live in the same structure, but in our situation, the family had what was known as a typhoon house.
I see.
And it was not typhoon proof.
Oh,
it was built from typhoon aid from a previous typhoon, and it was basically just a structure of 2x4s, plywood, and tin. And it was pretty spacious, but just one big open room. And we were able to live in that, separate but right next to our family's house.
I see. Okay. And did you have plumbing, electricity, all the utilities?
No running water, no electricity. There was a tin roof, so the water would run off that and into a catchment, a 55-gallon oil drum. We put a piece of screen over the top so it would try to keep out some of the contaminants. And there was plenty. We would have to brush them off from the screen. And we somehow survived. We did have an outhouse, just a little ways outside and up the hill from where we were. So it was pretty simple. And electricity, no, we used kerosene lamps and kerosene stoves. As far as eating, I'm afraid we did rely primarily on just canned goods that we got from our shopping runs. We ate a lot of rice. We would buy our rice in 55-pound bags or 25-kilogram bags, and ate a lot of Spam and other kind of canned meat. But on occasion, the family would gift us with some fish, some breadfruit. We did have some mangoes growing in the area and some papaya, but they didn't have a chance to ripen because the local folks like to eat them green.
I see.
So normally if there was a mango on a tree, a kid would be out with a slingshot trying to knock it down, and they'd disappear before they got ripe.
Oh, I see. Wow.
We had a little pineapple, but other volunteers enjoyed getting out and fishing more and doing things like that. I'm afraid that wasn't my thing, so I wasn't able to. But there were plenty of fish in the area, so that might have been good to have
Did
expanded
they
that.
fish within the lagoon or outside?
Yeah, the reefs are just teeming with fish. I mean, I have
okay,
snorkeled
yeah.
in the area, and it's just remarkable. Colorful, just beautiful settings, and just abundant with fish. And
Actually, that's a very popular tourist spot now.
because of the shipwrecks primarily, there are a lot of scuba tours that go there.
Oh, I see.
Because the visibility in that lagoon is so crystal clear that, and because the wave action is limited, it really has kept these wrecks
ideal,
fairly
yeah.
undisturbed. There are a
Oh,
lot of
interesting.
old dishes and even bones still remaining on some of the ships, and it's pretty accessible. I never did the scuba diving, but I did do just regular snorkeling and was still able to see planes and some of the main ships.
Wow.
And you know, I could just paddle out to them in a small canoe. So we did that, but we did feel that it was almost too much leaving one culture and getting into another to go through the scuba diving routine.
Right.
We didn't want to play tourists. We were there to live and be among the folks, the people living there,
Right.
and didn't want to both confuse our minds as well as the people that were our neighbors and our friends.
The people seem to engage in a lot of arts and crafts. I see
Yeah.
some of the things that you brought back with you.
There are a
Would you
few
like
things
to
here. Now there's one that people may
share?
have heard about called Truckie's Love Stick.
Oh.
And this may have heard about how, I don't know how authentic this particular one is, because this I'm sure was just made for the tourist trade. But the story goes that young men would carve these sticks in a unique way that somehow the women would know
that
which pattern associated with which young
uniquely
man.
identifies them.
And
Yeah.
back when there were thatched huts, they would slip through the wall, and the woman would then be able to tell whose stick that was. And the story goes, it would either be pulled in to accept or pushed out to say, sorry, see you later. And so now they say, of course, that doesn't happen as much with heavier building materials, concrete and wood. And something I read recently is that they're just as likely to text each other to arrange any kind of meetings.
Right.
And this kind of, it is a decorative wall mat. And this was made by the woman who was our host family, the mother in our host family. And this more recently, I was able to go back and visit in 2006. And she gave this to me, but I have similar ones from when she was first learning that back in 1974.
Oh, this looks like the star charts that the Marshallese use
I
for
think
navigation.
it's derived from some kind of mats that were developed perhaps in the Marshalls. I've seen similar things in Pohnpei as well. So I don't believe it's sort of a native design for Chuuk, but the artisans there have become pretty proficient on that. It's all native materials, mostly from coconut products, and this being a shell from a coconut,
Right.
and
then-
cowrie shells. But yeah, just the artistry of it is very
And these are
pleasing.
two different kinds of coconut parts? Or
The outer wrapping would be from one part, and yeah, this would be bleached. I don't know what the process is,
yeah.
but yeah, it's all
Beautiful.
different parts, and even the string to hang it from is just a sennet made from coconut fiber.
Okay.
And this we just picked up from our backyard once. I've actually repaired it because it was broken, and it had been discarded. But it's a coral
It looks
pounder,
like
which is very similar to the taro poi pounders that you would find in Hawaii. But this they use primarily for breadfruit. They're
for
staple.
breadfruit. Okay.
Yeah.
They,
And we did eat quite a bit of breadfruit, both fresh and pounded. And then during the real dry seasons, they have a certain preserved breadfruit that wasn't our favorite.
Oh,
But-
it's
but we
fermented?
would- yeah.
oh, okay.
And that process, after pounding it and wrapping it and burying it for several months,
oh, okay.
sometimes isn't a favorite taste. But it actually wasn't all that bad. It's just the
An
thought of the
acquired
process.
taste,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we did have some of that as well.
The islands where we were, people had migrated, I think, from the Truk and Yap Islands
Yeah.
further out. And so we saw a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know about the fermented breadfruit. I don't think they offered it to us, but they pounded the breadfruit, the cooked breadfruit, just like they do here in Hawaii.
The fresh was really very good.
And then they squeeze coconut milk on
Right.
it.
Yeah,
So
no, that was a
that was good.
real tasty treat. We really enjoyed it. We did have a chance during the summer months to travel to some of the outer islands.
Oh,
Some
okay.
as many as a couple hundred miles away.
Right.
And
Wow.
and they were the low islands, the atolls. And culturally they're quite different because they are even more isolated.
Right. You said you had transportation was not very common.
No,
So how
these
did-
were regular freight ships
okay.
that went on a somewhat regular basis. Usually it would mean we'd express an interest in going on the next ship, and they'd say, oh yeah, one's leaving in a week or so, and we just kind of wait around. And it
see.
might be several days before then finally they say, yeah, you better get down there, the ship is leaving.
Okay.
It was just deck passage. We would just sleep on board the deck. But there, the image that most people have of a tropical South Pacific island did exist and probably still does exist. Thatch roofs, thatch housing, men just in thews, the use of traditional sailing canoes, women topless. Recently the Micronesian navigator who taught the skills to the Hawaiian navigators
Yes.
was from that area. There's a line between Yap and Chuuk. You've mentioned Satawal,
Yes.
and there's Pulap, Pulasuk, and one other. But anyway,
Right.
those western islands of Chuuk are very much still using the traditional kinds of transportation.
Right.
And so the skills are still alive.
Still alive. Well, Greg, I'd like to thank you very much. Our time has slipped by. You know, I'm so glad you had a chance to share your experiences there. And I'd like to consider your wife coming on and continue on where you left off and see, you know, because you mentioned her work currently is really very related to what you've been doing during your Peace Corps service.
Right, yeah, she's stayed involved with Pacific Islands matters and is not with us today because she's out in the Pacific right now.
Right. So thank you very much for joining us today. And for our audience out there, please join us again next time when we bring the world home with another Peace Corps volunteer and their experiences abroad. You can get more information about the Peace Corps and might be inspired by stories like this to look into joining the Peace Corps. And thank you.